Will the Falcons rookie D lineman make an immediate impact? And which of their past draft picks are headed for breakout seasons in 2024?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Right. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for far too long, formerly at falcfans.com. You know, I have so many AKAs. People call me Mr. AKA. A lot of people call me Mr. Drew. You know, my friends call me Negative Nancy, but you can call me Mr. Drew. But if you want to become an everydayer of the podcast and make it your first watch or first listen of the day, you can do so. And all you got to do is real easy, guys. Just subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode, we will be joined by Will McFadden, the host of the Believe in Falcons podcast, as well as the contributor at the Falcoholic, to talk about, which rookies are going to impact, who are some second, third, and fourth year breakout candidates, as well as, talk about some of the intriguing matchups this year on the schedule. So without further ado, let's get into that conversation with Will McFadden right now. Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, joined by another illustrious guest. He is Will McFadden, host of the Believe in Falcons podcast, as well as a contributor at the Falcoholic. And today we're going to be talking about the recent rookie minicamp, right? The draft has been done for over 2 weeks. The Falcons just wrapped their minicamp this past weekend. Will, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the draft class as we sit here today? Obviously, if everything goes according to plan, we're not going to see Michael Penix for at least 2 years. But, let's talk a little bit about the guys that may contribute a little sooner versus later. What are your sort of expectations for the rest of this rookie draft class, and how much contributions are you sort of expecting from that group this year?
I like the draft class, actually. I kind of think that that's what most people generally end up leaning towards about this time after the draft, right? There's the immediate reaction where mock drafts color so much of our in the moment response. And people are like, well, I saw him go, 46th in mock drafts, and we took him 42nd. That's such a huge reach. What are we doing? And then you get a little bit of distance. You understand like why the team made specific picks. And I thought it was kind of funny, but also notable that the Falcons just hammered the defensive line right after making the Penix pick. And it felt a little bit like okay, you guys wanted us to take defense. Fine. Hear you loud and clear. Defense, 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 defense. And I think that really had a lot to do with when you look at what the Falcons defense has undergone over the last few years. Like, we talk about the quarterback position a lot over the kind of Arthur Smith era, but going from Dan Quinn, Raheem Morris, that defensive style, to Dean Pease and that kind of 3-4 look, to Ryan Nielsen and a different type of front, now back to kind of a 3-4, like they needed, I think, some different types of bodies on the defensive front. And so to see them go with Ruke Orhorhoro, Bralen Trice, then Brandon Dorlus makes a lot of sense to me. And it's actually, I think probably Brandon Dorlus is a player who, even though he was the 4th pick for Atlanta, I kind of think he may be the person who right from the jump is going to have a nice role on this team. And maybe Bralen Trice is somebody who I'm just already penciling in because he feels like a very high floor player. But those two guys, because of Dorlus's versatility, which is something I really liked in Laiatu Latu, but if you look at what he did at Oregon, he was playing kind of like all over the defensive line for them. And he's got that length. He's got really just kind of like bull in a china shop type of play style. I think that he's going to be an asset on early downs. And then really the wild card is going to be the pass down ability for him. But Bralen Trice is going to be, I think, right from the jump, somebody that factors into that mix with Arnold Ebiketie, Lorenzo Carter as kind of your third down pass rushing specialist. So Those two guys, I think, are the most ready-made to contribute. And then I think Ruke Orhorhoro is somebody who is a better run defender right now. And maybe that is something that allows him to see the field when they need to spell Grady Jarrett or David Onyemata. But because those two guys are in place already, he feels more like a groom and develop for next year. And then he's going to hit the ground running type of player. So that's kind of why I'm looking at Dorlus and Trice as maybe the guys from this rookie class who, if I had to make a prediction for week one, who is seeing the most snaps in a rotation, it would be those two guys.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. It seems like the general consensus from a lot of people is that, if you kind of reverse the order of which they took those D linemen, if you had taken Brandon Dorlus first, Trice, and then Ruke Orhorhoro, I think the general feeling of that trio would probably feel a lot better because it matches up more with what you're talking about with the mock drafts and how people stack their draft board. And it does appear that a lot of people seem to be of that trio tend to be higher on Brandon Dorlus. So I'm eagerly looking forward to breaking down his film later this summer as we get through it. But, with some of these rookies coming in and, whatever their expectations are, we'll have to sort of see. But we know there's a lot of other young players on the Falcons defense, especially, that are going to be asked to take bigger roles this upcoming season. And I want to sort of pick Will's brain on sort of who are some of these past Terry Fontenot draft picks that may be due for some breakout type of years. And we'll do that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. There is lots of intrigue in this year's Falcons schedule. Arthur Smith returned to Atlanta as the Steelers' offensive coordinator. Patrick Mahomes' first ever trip to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There are tons of matchups to enjoy, and our friends at Game Time are helping you take the guesswork out of buying tickets thanks to their killer last-minute deals. All in prices and views from your seat. It's easy to find and buy NFL tickets and tickets for really any kind of event in your area. And I love the views from your seat feature on Game Time because it can help me sort of picture what it's going to look like when Patrick Mahomes, breaks outside the pocket and throws up a lob to Travis Kelce over Richie Grant's head or DeMarco Helms' head, or how beautiful it's going to look when my favorite non-monogamous safety, Jesse Bates, is going to cheat on a crosser, picking off Justin Fields for a pick six and take it to the house. I can find that perfect corner spot to watch him run that into the tunnel. And you can too by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel. Get the latest updates on all the big stories across the nation, across the world, here on YouTube on the 24/7 streaming channel, as well as the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. And of course, you can also check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, especially given some recent news involving the Atlanta Hawks, going up high in the NBA draft. Go check it out. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Will, regardless of, how much you think and who you think in the rookie class is going to contribute, I think most would agree that a lot of the Falcons' plans and bets that they seem to be making heading into this season are surrounding bigger contributions from past draft picks, and looking at these second year, third year, and even fourth year guys that have made up Terry Fontenot's previous drafts. Which players do you think are going to make the biggest jumps? And I'm going to just take Bijan, Drake, and Kyle Pitts off the table for you because everybody knows that those guys are going to be, key parts of their team this year. But, who are some of these second and third year guys that you're looking at that you expect to make a big jump this year?
Well, I may cheat a little bit on my first answer here. You've got breakout as the graphic showing, and this would not necessarily be a breakout season. If anything, I think it would be a bounce back season for this player, but he would definitely need one, and that's Richie Grant. I think it's notable that Richie Grant is still here on the team. I think everybody had circled him as a pretty prime candidate to maybe get moved in a trade, released outright, and that safety could then become a position of need for the Falcons. I look at this as a kind of situation where he really could benefit from a potential scheme change. I think he's also really going to benefit from having a voice like Raheem Morris, a voice like Jimmy Lake in the room, who have a strong background in the secondary. Because and we're talking about this on a day that Antoine Winfield gets a huge contract extension. I think Richie Grant is a good player. I think Richie Grant has a lot of the tools that you look for in a modern safety. I just think that his best usage is not in the way that they used him last year. And so I think that he really struggled being put in some of these man coverage situations deep down the field. And that's where you want like Jesse Bates. That's where you wanted DeMonte Casey. That's not really where you want Richie Grant. Where I would love to see him play and where I expect him to be utilized a little bit more is much closer to the line of scrimmage, kind of in the box around that linebacker level. I don't know if he's the guy that you necessarily always want matching up against your tight ends or your slot receivers, but he can be a little bit of that joker area where you can utilize his kind of well-roundedness to great effect to confuse the quarterback, right? And so that's kind of the first player that popped to mind when you sent me the question, because he is almost like his stock is at an all-time low. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the year we're kind of saying, all right, well, Richie Grant, what do they do? Are they bringing him back on a contract extension? What do they? And like that is not a question to anybody right now. So for that reason, he is a little bit of a bounce back candidate that I could certainly see having a good year. Then my next person is somebody who I expected to be having a breakout year last year, but he got hurt, and that's Troy Andersen. And he's maybe the biggest question mark right now on this defense, just because he hasn't been on the field. But we know what the athleticism is. We know, how you could theoretically use him. When I was going back and looking at the blitz rates, he was second on the team just behind Caden Ellis in terms of non defensive front players, right? Your down linemen, your edge defenders in kind of the blitz usage. And he only played 2 games, so we would need to see that extrapolated out over the course of the season. But I think that's an indicator of how the team would maybe like to use him. And so knowing that I think the Falcons are going to run a lot of these simulated pressures, he could be a prime candidate to be, hey, pin your ears back and go get the quarterback. Especially he's a player, when you look at JD Bertrand, who they drafted, that's also a skill set of his. So I have to imagine that these inside linebackers are going to be used a lot to pressure the quarterback. And Troy Andersen, I think, is going to be really good in that area if he can stay healthy. So he is somebody who, again, we haven't seen a ton of out there on the field, but I think he has the tools in this defense to have a very productive season. A couple other names, Clark Phillips, obviously looks like he's going to have to really step into a big role. I'm wondering if it's going to be just outright given to him. I think a lot of people are assuming that he's just going to be, kind of that other corner opposite of AJ Terrell. But, they've made some moves this offseason. They haven't been the big name moves, but they've added a few more corners in the mix here. So I think that's going to be a very interesting training camp. Drew Dalman on the offensive side of the ball, I think is going to benefit greatly from having Kirk Cousins in the building, because that is something that I expect him to be able to take off of the offensive line's plate. When you have, a second-year quarterback in Desmond Ridder, or a little bit of a different style of offense with Marcus Mariota, the quarterback was responsible for really kind of diagnosing a lot, but wasn't always well equipped to do that in pass protection. I think now that Kirk Cousins is here and he has all the experience, he is going to benefit the entire offensive line greatly when it comes to pass protection. And that's an area that I think you could see maybe Drew Dalman's best season for that reason. And then I'll wrap it up with a true second-year player, and that's Zach Harrison. I think the skill set for Zach Harrison is awesome. I think that he does have the tools to develop, maybe not into a 12-sack player, but a nice, well-rounded run defender, gives you some juice off the edge on a passing down. He could be part of a good 4, maybe not ever as your number 1, but certainly as a productive pass rushing line. I just, again, wonder about scheme fit a little bit here, because He, to me, was awesome if you were going to plug him into that Ryan Nielsen style of defensive fronts. With this little hybrid version that we've got going here, I wonder, because the thing that I think he doesn't do as well as some other players is that in space lateral agility. And that is probably the characteristic that you're going to need to have if you're a stand-up edge defender in this defense. So he may get lost a little bit in like the position shuffle and not have a true home. But I think the skill set is apparent, and he really does have, I believe, what it takes to be a successful NFL player. So I gave you a lot of names there, but if even half of those guys do have a better season in 2024 than they did in 2023, then the Falcons will probably be a playoff team.
I think that's fair. Going back to Richie Grant, and I have been on this podcast, defending Richie Grant's performance in 2023, probably more so than your average Falcon fan, as you suggested. And I'm curious to circle back to that, because you mentioned something about, a scheme shift that could have him playing maybe closer to the line of scrimmage. And I'm curious, given I feel like that exact role is the ideal role for a player like DeMarco Hellams. Do you feel like if that is the vision that the Falcons have, playing a little bit more in the box, do you feel like Richie Grant would be able to win that competition against DeMarco Hellams, or do you feel like Hellams has, a shot to overtake him, as we saw at the end of last season?
I think that there's a chance it might not matter, because I think if you look back to kind of the end of Raheem Morris's time here in Atlanta, they had the 3 safety defense. They had DeMonte Casey, they had Keanu Neal, they had Ricardo Allen out there on the field at the same time. And as we're sitting here talking about the lack of established cornerbacks for Atlanta, and I know, with D. Alford, with Mike Hughes, you feel maybe a little bit better about your nickel situation. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if there are times where we see both Marco Hellams and Richie Grant kind of playing in those kind of closer to the line of scrimmage roles, and you still got Jesse Bates back there to man center field. And then to me, that also plays into this post-snap fluidity that I think is going to be a really kind of defining factor for this defense, where once the ball is snapped, dudes are not going to be where you expect them to be. And so having almost a balanced defense with 3 safeties on the field, 2 of which are on opposite sides, and then one's kind of in the middle, that allows you to rotate really any way you want and still kind of maintain some numbers and a guy there that you think could do what you need him to, whether that's somebody dropping deep or somebody kind of coming up or guarding a tight end or a slot receiver. So I think that if I had to, like, Marco Hellams did really well as a rookie, but sometimes, that second year, once other teams get a sense of what you can do, your strengths and weaknesses, we do see him come back down to earth a little bit. I think Marco Hellams is an awesome player. I think that in a head-to-head competition, the number of snaps that Richie Grant has seen throughout his career so far, I do think gives him a slight edge up on that. But it really would not surprise me at all if you see Marco Hellams just kind of take that job like he did in camp, where he just was every single week kind of moving up the depth chart and gaining more reps. Like, he is a great player for that reason, but I also wouldn't discount the potential to see all 3 of those guys on the field at the same time.
That's definitely fair. So this week we will get a look at the Falcons' official schedule, and I just want to pick Will's brain on sort of what to him is the most intriguing matchup that he is looking forward to, and we'll do that to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So it is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home that big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning bet that you can use on spreads, money lines, player props, and so much more. And of course, not just basketball and hockey and baseball that's going on right now. You got the upcoming NFL season, of course, with the schedule coming out. Maybe you want to go on over to FanDuel and check out the Falcons over-under win total, 9.5 wins. Take the over, take the under, right? Who knows? NBA draft props, right? Who's the favorite to be the number one pick in a future Atlanta Hawk? That is, of course, Alex Sarr. Go check that out if you want to take those odds or take someone else. It's all available over at FanDuel.com/locked on. And make sure you make every bet and playoff shot count this year. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So, well, with the 2024 schedule release only days away as we're recording this, I want to look ahead to this upcoming season. Is there any particular matchup that you're looking forward to seeing this year between the Falcons and one of these upcoming opponents, and why is that?
I mean, there are a lot, because there are a lot of reunion / like revenge matchups on the docket, and it's something I just went through the whole schedule for the most recent episode of Believe in Falcons with Bryce Lewis came on, and we literally just picked a game for every single week. We predicted what we thought the schedule would be. It's a tough exercise, man. I do not envy these schedule makers in the NFL, because you kind of work yourself into a little bit of a hole, and you're like, we haven't picked a Thursday night game yet. Oh, can't do it this week. It's Thanksgiving. Oh, can't do it over here because do they have a bye week after that? So hats off to them for figuring it out every single year. Minnesota, because of the Kirk Cousins kind of reunion there, is going to be a fun one. I think Washington, because of the Dan Quinn reunion, but then obviously Pittsburgh. It's probably got to be like everybody's answer at this point, just because of the Arthur Smith factor. And then when you look at the number of former Falcons that they are signing and kind of bringing over there, I think that the potential is high for a very competitive type of game where you've got, obviously some respect between both sides, but you're not going to want to lose to that other team. And Arthur Smith is going to want to come in and prove to everybody. Like, it would not shock me if they're trying to put up 40 against this team, just because he has had to hear for the last 3 years how his offense sucks, how he can't coach, how he's horrible at all of this. He doesn't know anything. Like, I would not be surprised at all, knowing how competitive he is, if that one has a little bit of extra juice for him. So I think Pittsburgh is the one that feels like it's got just the most potential for everybody being locked in. And if you're not ready, like, Pittsburgh's going to be coming and trying to knock you out. Maybe the one that I'm most afraid of, if that's the right way to put it. I don't know. It's the matchup I like the least for Atlanta, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers, which isn't something I think I expected to say, but the more that I've thought about it, the way that you look at how, again, I expect Atlanta's defense to kind of operate is the gap in the half, run defense, and really goading other teams into wanting to run the ball, because that is, the least efficient way, at least, to put up points on the board according to modern analytics. But what are the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh going to want to do? They're going to want to run the ball down other teams' throats. So I would fully expect Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake to come in with a plan prepared for exactly that. However, if your identity and style of defense is a little bit of a mismatch for that team, and knowing kind of the talent that they are building on the offensive side of the ball there in LA, that one scares me a little bit if I'm kind of projecting out. But what about you, Aaron? What's the game that you've got circled on the schedule?
I was just going through and looking at some key matchups for each game. And like, there's always something intriguing about every game, right? Like, that's, when you're a football nerd like I am, like, you always find fascinating things, even when it's, the Falcons have 3 wins and the opponent they're facing has like 2 wins, and you're always like that. So I'm stalling, Will, because I don't really have an answer for you in terms of one that stands out. But for me, like, sitting here today, because of the expectations that the Falcons will be a playoff team, I kind of want to see how they measure up against the 3 teams that also are sort of going into the season taking for granted that they're going to be in the playoffs, which is Kansas City, Dallas, and Philadelphia. And I think those are very intriguing matches. I looked up a stat earlier today that basically, like, the Falcons-Eagles matchup is like a litmus test for the Eagles. Like, if the Eagles beat the Falcons, they're a playoff team. And when they lose to the Falcons over the last like 25 years, like, they don't make the playoffs. Like, I think the record is like, when the Eagles the Falcons have won 4 games. They're 4-1 against the Eagles in the seasons where they missed the playoffs, and they're like 1-11 in the seasons where they've made the playoffs. So it's just like,
wow,
it's one of those things like, yeah, the Eagles always do crazy things. So part of me is probably intrigued by that matchup. Basically, like if the Falcons beat the Eagles, it either means that the Eagles suck this year, or maybe the Falcons are actually good for once in my lifetime. But yeah, I think that's probably one of the games that is most intriguing to me. And I'm just curious for my final question, Will, since you already went through this exercise, how many primetime games do you think the Falcons are going to get this year?
Yeah, it's a great one. I think we landed on 3. So we had them opening the year against Minnesota on Monday Night Football, on one of those 2 kind of Monday night matchups, just because again, the Kirk Cousins of it all feels like and the tampering and like all of the whatnot. So it felt like that one was rife for storylines. Then we actually had the Falcons Eagles game closing out Thanksgiving week, which I believe is week 12, on Sunday Night Football, which the last time the Falcons played Sunday Night Football was against Philly in week 2 of the 2019 season, where Julio Jones caught the screen, took it the distance for that huge late fourth quarter touchdown. So that was an awesome game. And then I want to say, well, all right, then we had as our Thursday night game, which I guess, counts as primetime, but everybody gets one of those. We had them against the New York Football Giants, which feels just like it'll be a Thursday night game because nobody's going to want to watch that one. So yeah, that would be, those would be the 3 that I believe. And I don't think I'm forgetting any. What's so weird though, is because now they've got all the Saturday games kind of late in the year, weeks 15, 16, and 18, I think. Then you've got 2 Christmas games. Like there's going to be a lot of primetime matchups late in the year, where if the Falcons are one of these teams that does accomplish what we hope that they will accomplish, I think that they would be rife for getting flexed into some of these later games, because it'll be the first real chance for the national media audience to get behind Bijan Robinson, get behind Drake London, get behind Kyle Pitts, and kind of promote them on a bigger stage. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Falcons do well, they kind of see those numbers pop up a little bit towards the end of the year. But I think right now we had 3 just going off the top. And of course, one of those is a Thursday night game. If you don't want to count that, then we've got 2.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I think, adding Kirk Cousins is going to raise the Falcons profile a little bit. The expectations right now is that they are a playoff team, which probably means, the way that this has gone the last couple of years, that almost guarantees that they're going to get at least one Monday night game. And because the Monday night games are always these teams, we think this team is like, I remember when Russell Wilson went to Denver, like I think they had like 2 or 3 Monday night games. And last year the Jets, I think, had like 2 or 3 Monday night games because of Aaron Rodgers. And, obviously those examples didn't go the way that they hoped. And obviously we're hoping for a different outcome for the Atlanta Falcons, but it is one of those things where it does feel like, you get a big time quarterback and it raises your profile. You'll get at least one Monday night game this year. So we'll see what happens when the schedule drops Wednesday night later this week, but we'll, let the people know where they can find your stuff and what are some of the things you're talking about and working on at Believe in Falcons, the Falcoholic as well this summer.
Yeah, so that new episode of Believe in Falcons up this morning, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, go check that out. Mailbag on the Falcoholic coming every Thursday. Not sure if we'll have it this week just because of schedule release. Maybe very busy writing some schedule analysis pieces on that, but we will probably have a live reaction to the schedule release on Believe in Falcons. So just keep an eye on that feed if you would like. But Aaron, this was awesome. I always love coming on your show. You ask some great questions, and this was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I will accept that humbly because I'm so humble on this podcast. But thank you, Will, for joining me. And I look forward to, when the pads come on later this summer, what this team looks like and seeing, which of these young players, rookies, second year, et cetera, sort of step up as we discussed on today's episode. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us here. Thanks to Will McFadden. Tomorrow's episode will be joined by Dave Choate, the head honcho of the Falcoholic. We'll probably talk a little bit about the 2 tryout players the Falcons picked up over the weekend, as well as what's still left to be done with this roster. It's all going to be your first listen tomorrow. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, Locked On Bulldogs as your second listen. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.